Everyone, Terry Hashimoto here with my business partner, Jordan Young. Our partner is Mike Miller, the AD Sports Medical Sciences at Detroit Mercy. Is that correct, Mike?
Associate AD, yeah, but that works.
AD. There you go. And Chad Miller, our sports scientist guy and baseball expertise fitter. We're going to go deep into a few questions that Mike was asking about earlier on in a previous segment. But before we do that, Mike, I've populated a couple of screens here so people could see this. And Chad, chime in here, and Jordan too, whenever you want. But Mike, you were telling me about two examples of athletes that you were working with that improved their CAMS test over a 6-week period. One was a basketball female player.
Yep.
And she had 2 knee issues. Did it look like this kind of?
Exactly like that. It almost looks like the same one, but I know the percentage wasn't as good. So she was like at a 50, or she improved about 7% on her overall, but she improved about 10% in her reduction of injury. And the stability issues that you saw in both bilateral knees that she had a surgical right knee, meniscus debridement. Basically, they cleaned up her knee and took some of her meniscus, so she's probably got a little bone on bone after some time. But it was about 8 weeks actually after I tested her, and all of her lower extremity mobility issues. She had 2 bilateral stability issues on on both knees, and then her right Achilles was a mobility issue. So the mobility issue in their right ankle was gone. The stability issues, those were not detected, I should say, as her primary areas of dysfunction. But her biggest issue was balance, proprioception, and her core strength. So in the post-test, or the second follow-up test, she had bilateral SI and hip mobility issues, which indicates to me that those 6 to 8 weeks of her physical therapy and rehab had changed the outlook of all her dysfunctions in her body. But I would expect to see that low back core area, the hips area, to start showing that mobility issue based on what we had been working with. So the next step is, okay, you're working on all this balance, the proprioception, the core strengthening. Let's free up her hips, let's free up her back, and see what we get out of her in the next phase. So it was very impressive to me, very exciting news, I thought. And the second individual, I have not had a chance to retest him yet, but the proof's in the pudding, because he had a significant right ankle injury. This is a men's basketball player. And we did the CAMS test on him, and we checked his mobility. He was having surgery actually the next day on his ankle. So we did the full test on him, the full CAMS, and he had more dysfunction in his knees, and then his left hip and left back, and then also his left shoulder. And I'm starting to see with this that those mobility issues translate along to the right side, more of the stress. So I thought his Achilles pain was coming from mobility issues in his pelvis, his hips. So he had more, the ankle was on the right side. The left side of his SI and hip were all mobility issues. So this is where it's hard to educate people, and especially your staff. And I'm like, okay, what did you do? This kid still comes in, complains about his Achilles. And I asked my staff, did you address the hip and the left low back? No, I haven't done that yet. So started to do that, and it was like 2 weeks, and I'm hearing this kid, my Achilles has been great. So
amazing.
But here's the other thing. So then I heard the kid a couple weeks later say, yeah, my Achilles is bothering me again. And I asked my staff again, have you been working on his hip mobility issues?
Oh,
yeah,
wow.
We kind of got away from that. So that's my point, is this is a huge teaching aspect, but it's also, let's address the issues that we have and work on those issues and see what we can come up with. I think that 6 to 8 week retest piece is a great option to see where you're at with your rehabilitation. I see a lot of my staff members get a little bit nervous and concerned, wondering if their protocols are going to make a change in this, and it has. So rest assured, they're thinking, oh, the dysfunction's in a different area, but it may be in a different area, but you've got to rationalize what you've been doing with that athlete. And that has been key for me, and a believer in the CAMs, but also just getting a deep dive into what next, what's the capabilities, and what more can we do with this. And that's my excitement about it.
So Chad, Mike, Jordan, so let me see if I got this right. So the athlete's Achilles was bothering him, but based on the CAMs, it was the hip and SI joint. So
Yep.
you convinced your team to work on the SI and the hip area,
Absolutely.
and it straightened out the Achilles. And I believe, Chad,
Yes.
you do this all the time like that. You have to interpret this, correct?
Yeah, I mean, it's great. I mean, what Mike's talking about is exactly what we find every day. And what I love about this is it gives targeted activations, because I think we as coaches, trainers, practitioners, we get very lazy from time to time, where we're like, okay, man, you got an Achilles issue. Here's your protocol for this. And here's your TheraBand. I want you to spell the letters with your toes. I want you to do some, I want you to do some Achilles stretches on the wall with the wedge. Here we go. And then what we miss a lot of times, and this is to fault to the system. It's more a systemic problem than anything. Is that these guys are dealing with 400 athletes for 5 people, so they're significantly outmanned when it comes to taking care of the athlete. What this allows us to do is say, listen, how is the alignment, and then what's the compensatory functionality of what we're seeing here? Because again, what we oftentimes say is we'll see somebody come in for a left hip, and it's really their right knee. And I think Mike's spot on. Is that it really is you as a coach, a practitioner, a trainer. It allows you to really take a deeper dive into what might be the root cause, opposed to just treating the symptom.
Is it fair to say, this is to the team, that most injuries are compensatory related?
I believe a lot of the overuse, and another aspect is that I'm seeing, like I said, you see mobility issues in that one shoulder, and then the same side hip, and then you see the opposite side of the body that's affected. And what's getting me is same thing what Chad was saying is people waste so much time just thinking, okay, I'm going to stim, I'm going to heat, I'm going to do all these things with it, but that may not even be the root cause. You also got to evaluate what you're doing, how you're treating things. That's what I think is the groundbreaker with this. Is I think we're finding things that's you're working in an area that you may never get a good result out of because you're not addressing the other issues. And that's the biggest thing on my end and with my staff. And the workload is crazy. And that's one of the reasons why I want my staff to start utilizing this, and then they can plot out their correctives, plot out their rehabilitation, and address what needs to be addressed.
Jordan, you had an example in Detroit when we were there visiting a few universities.
Yeah, I mean, let me preface this that I am not an expert like Chad and Mike are. I teach golf for a living, and I don't know a ton about the body, but just enough to be dangerous. But yeah, I mean, for me, the big picture here is seeing us able to use the software in the field with different kinds of athletes, whether it be men, women, kids, adults, and being able to attack certain areas right away. I'm going to hand those things off to Mike and Chad, and but yeah, it's been great. It's been great to hear the different stories that we hear from Mike and Chad, and how they're utilizing it on a daily basis. And I just think that it's a great tool for us.
So, Mike, Chad, I'm at the functional planar mapping section of the CAMS report, and I'm going straight to the indexes, and I've been finding a lot of value in looking at this, or where they balance index very high, flexibility index low. This happens to be a 16-year-old elite athlete that has a known hip issue, and but struggling with the knees. But what was interesting was, and this guy's very fit, his flexibility was low, his core stability moderate, dynamic posture index moderate, lower extremity, lower power score very low, but his functional asymmetry index very high, susceptibility to injury kind of moderate. Now, taking a look at this data, if you can see this, where the knees are clearly marked in stability issues, and then the hip and SI joint are marked for mobility issues. So would you guys probably take a look at the left hip and SI joint to work on?
Definitely, you gotta think about besides the CAMS test itself, I'm going to look at the hips. I'm going to look at how his SI joint tracks when, on a regular evaluation. And then I'll make some adjustments based on that. But showing the mobility issue, the biggest thing I would be working on is that hip and SI joint, but the strengthening piece to it and the areas of dysfunction, that's the key that I like to look at too, the rotational and what areas we need to work on. I think one, you got to address the hip, the mobility piece. Two, your upper back and everything else. But I think too, looking at flexibility, core, all that stuff needs a lot of work. So his power score may be low based on his limitations. So he not seeing or knowing this individual, my guess is he has some extreme flexibility issues that are creating a lot of strain in his knee areas.
Roger, what about you, Chad? What do you say? If you can see it, we can add.
Yeah, no, I can see it. I'm in alignment with Mike on that. I mean, I think the biggest thing is you have to really think about what activities is this athlete going to be participating in. So if he's a rotational mover, so let's say he's a lacrosse player, let's say he's a hockey player, a baseball player, and in that situation, I mean, the first thing I'm going to really go after is one, getting him loose and mobile, but two, I'm going to really hammer home the core strength, simply because what's going to happen with that side joint is basically he's bracing the entire time trying to keep his center rotation. That's one of the things that we forget about sometimes as coaches and as trainers, is that what is this guy actually trying to achieve with his movement patterns? And what's so nice about this is that we're going to be able to say, okay, the root cause of this, yeah, he's extremely inflexible, or not, has very low mobility, but in the same aspect, every day he's going out and grinding that. It's you're basically taking two pieces of sandpaper and rubbing them together whenever you have somebody this stiff. So what we have to do is get him in a good activation protocol, and then we've got to make sure that his core is strong enough to maintain his chin over his belly button whenever he goes in that rotational movement pattern.
Excellent.